Good day, everyone. We are Group 2 from History of English Language Class A, and now we're going to present our mind map of language contact in the Middle Ages. Beforehand, let me tell you a bit about the House of Wessex family tree. Disclaimer, this is a bit complicated to understand, but I tried my best to give a clear picture for you. Following the death of Alfred the Great, the West Saxons under Alfred's heir, Edward, and later his grandson, Athelstan, managed to keep the Danes in check and retain the strength of Wessex. They even managed to take back areas of the Danelaw, and in 937, Athelstan secured his most decisive victory over the Danes at the battles of Brunanburh. Following this, Athelstan had himself proclaimed king of the Anglo-Saxons and Danes, and it is now that we start to see the beginnings of a unified England. However, this success was not to last. The Danes reclaimed power, leading to Svein Forkbeard claiming the throne of England in 1014. This then passed to his son Canute, who ruled until 1035. Following Canute's death, his son Harthacnut ruled from 1040 when he took over from his half-brother Harold I Harefoot until 1042. As Harthacnut had no son, the throne then passed to Edward, later to become known as Edward the Confessor. Edward was Harthacnut's half-brother. They had the same mother, Emma of Normandy, who had given birth to Edward while married to Ethelred the Unready, which is the great-great-grandson of Alfred the Great. The result of Edward's accession to the throne was a restoration of the Saxon line after many years of Danish kings. Now, what is significant about Edward the Confessor becoming king is that he had been brought up in Normandy as a result of his father's exile there. The historian Norman Davies describes him as a Trojan horse for the rising power of Normandy. The influence of French turns out to be hugely important in explaining how English developed next. The next material will be explained by my friend.
Okay, thank you, Aldira. So we move to the first chapter of it. It is on the year of 1066 and all that. So at first, the country before this year, led by King Edward, and because he had died childless, the battle for the throne of the kingdom happened. The first claimant is Harold Godwinson. So Harold claimed that King Edward had promised him on his deathbed that he would be his successor to the throne. But Harold is not the only one. The second claimant is William of Normandy. William also claimed that King Edward had promised him the throne during his visit to England in 1052. But before this, Harold Godwinson actually had promised to have William claim the throne after King Edward, but Harold recognized that he had been tricked into making this promise, and as it had been made under pressure, he felt no responsibility to honor it. This then led to the infamous Battle of Hastings in 166. On the other hand, the King of Norway also came to take the English throne. He was trying to invade the north of England, but William had repelled it with formidable army. In the midst of the fighting, Harold was killed and the battle won by William of Normandy. On Christmas Day, 1066, William of Normandy was crowned as the King of England in Westminster Abbey, and the French language had well and truly arrived in England. The following chapter will be explained by my friend.
Okay, thank you, Fatur. Hello, I'm Fatika Mayani with trial student number 008. I will explain about from Old English to Middle English. The first is about consequences of the Norman invasion. The Norman invasion of England had far-reaching consequences for the development of the English language. Of course, the language didn't change overnight, but gradually French began to have an influence that was to change English substantially and lead it into its next stage of development, Middle English. And we have already seen how, because of Edward the Confessor's Norman origin, the language of the royal court would have become dominated by France. This would have continued to an even greater extent under William the Conqueror. Furthermore, the language of administration favored by William would have been Latin, since this would have been used at home. So from that French became the vernacular language of the royal court, and Latin the language of administration, and of course, religion. And then the next about the influence of French in terms of linguistic consequences. The influence of French in terms of linguistic consequences, this means that French was coming into contact with English, and also the French would have gradually attained the prestige that English had formerly enjoyed, since French was now the language of the ruling class. And the next is how French affecting English. In the immediate aftermath of Hastings, it should be said that the effect of French on the majority of the native English population was probably very minimal. Townspeople would have heard it spoken much more than people in the country, and the extent to which they experience they had with the type of people for whom French was the vernacular language. For instance, traders around London were much more likely to come into contact with French speakers than farmers in the countryside. Over time, some of this effort would begin to affect English itself. And then the next is contributory factor to the decline of an inflection system in English. So it should be noted that the breakdown of the system of inflection had already begun in the Old English period with different dialects of English. And the last is English borrowing word from French. This was the search of a lot of new vocabulary in English. In short, French began to affect English at many linguistic levels, including vocabulary, spelling, grammar, and pronunciation. To extent to which French began to mix with English would have been increased by, for example, intermarriage between French and English nobility, and also trade. For intermarriage between French and English nobility, the children of such unions would have grown up bilingual and would have been likely to engage in code switching, which would have further increased the hybrid nature of English. And for trade, too, would have led people to mix languages, to borrow vocabulary, and generally to be influenced by each other's ways of speaking and writing. So all of the development changed English to such an extent that linguistics refer to the English of this period as Middle English. Middle English is usually said to refer to English around 1100 to 1500, and the reason Middle English is not that from the arrival of William Conqueror in 1066 is because change never immediate, and it would have taken several years for French to start having an influence of English. I think that's all from me, and the presentation will be continued by my friend Leon. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Fatika. So, I'm gonna explain about the decline of French and the rise of English. So the first one is French replaced English. Though English status became downgraded, this is due to the Norman conquest French. English is changed from being a language of officialdom to being primarily a spoken language. However, English remained the language spoken by the majority, and the status was to rise again due to some events that led to gradual decline in the use of French. Those events are Normandy conquered by French, Hundred Years' War, and Black Death. So the first event is Normandy conquered by French. So English lost an important territorial connection with French. This is because King John, the descendants of William the Conqueror, failed to defend Normandy in 1204. One of the long-term effects of this loss is that stronger sense of English identity was generated among the nobility of England. So, some of the English nobility began to accuse Henry III of favoring those of his subjects who were of French descent. And then Henry responded by issuing a royal proclamation in English as well as French. This was a kind of propaganda designed to emphasize Henry's commitment to his English nobility. Here, English is not just a means of communication, but it was being used strategically to foster identity. And the next is Hundred Years' War. Okay, Hundred Years' War happened between 1337 and 1453, a war between England and France. In this period, Henry V began to use English to write these speeches home from his campaigns. This is an example of English being used for propaganda. To write in French means to write in the language of enemy. Using English created greater sense of national identity. The next is Black Death. So, Black Death is a term used to refer to the bubonic plague that arrived in England in 1348. Black Death killed around a third of the population of the country at that time. So the population reduced drastically and it also reduced the country's workforce. It made the wages of the working class increase and they were able to climb the ladder of social hierarchy that's impossible before the Black Death. And as we know, the stronger the power of a particular group has within society, the language also will be seen as prestigious. But in some domains of life, for example, religion, English was still not the dominant language used. So that's from me. The next will be explained by my friend.
Okay, thank you, Leonie. So now I will be explaining about Middle English dialect. So Middle English dialects is an English form used in the year 1100 until 1500. So at that time in that period, there was no established standard form of English, just like in today's English. So Burrow and Terville Petra distinguish 5 Middle English dialects into according to each geographical areas. So there are 5. First is Northern, second is West Midland, third is East Midland, fourth is Southeast, and lastly is Southwest. So between these 5 geographical areas, there are dotted line called isogloss. So what is isogloss? So isogloss is a boundary denoting point at which can be noticed in the use of particular linguistic items. So the more simple definition would be isogloss is a line on a dialect map marking the boundary between linguistic features that affect particular spellings and also pronunciations. Pronunciations, for example, is 2 different pronunciations of the same word. So the example of this isogloss is the ending of the plural present indicative of verbs. For example, is the verb love. In the southern area, they use eth or eth as in loveth, and in the midland areas, they add en that sounds loven, and in the northern areas, they use es, so it sounds loves. And then also another example, the pronoun they. In the southern areas, many people use high, here, higher, and home. And in the northern area, a lot of people use they, their, them, which the H is what early became predominant, especially in today's English. So in Middle English period, there was no single dialect or variety of the language whose spelling, vocabulary, and grammar were used for writing throughout the country. So that's why at that time there are no standard form of English yet, and there are no also writing form of English. So that is our Group 2 presentation about language contact in the Middle Ages. Thank you so much for watching.